Welcome, friends. Today we're setting out on a journey unlike any we've taken before. We're going to visit the final resting places of 40 men and women who made our hearts pound, who kept us on the edge of our seats, who threw the punches and took the falls and drove the fast cars and leapt from the burning buildings. These are the action legends, the stars who defined toughness, daring, and heroism on screen for more than a century of movie making. Some are buried in grand cemeteries beside other Hollywood royalty. Others rest in quiet churchyards, small-town plots, and faraway places you'd never expect. A few left no grave at all, their ashes given to the wind and the sea. Wherever they ended up, their stories are worth the trip. So let's begin. And we're going to begin with a man whose passing is still fresh in all our hearts. Carlos Ray Norris was born in Ryan, Oklahoma, on March 10, 1940, the oldest of 3 boys in a family that didn't have much. His father was a World War II Army veteran who struggled with alcohol, and his mother, Wilma, raised the boys largely on her own. By the time he was 12, the family had relocated to Torrance, California, where young Chuck, as he would not yet be called, described himself as shy, non-athletic, and frequently bullied. Nothing about his childhood suggested he would one day become one of the most recognizable action stars on the planet. Everything changed when Norris enlisted in the United States Air Force in 1958 and was stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea. It was there that 2 things happened that would shape the rest of his life. First, his fellow airmen gave him the nickname Chuck. Second, he discovered the martial arts, beginning his training in Tang Soo Do. By the time he was discharged in 1962 with the rank of Airman First Class, the martial arts had become his calling. Back in California, Norris opened a chain of karate studios while he waited on a list to become a police officer. That law enforcement career never materialized. The martial arts consumed him instead. He began competing in tournaments and, after some early losses, became virtually unbeatable. Between 1966 and 1974, Chuck Norris was a 6-time undefeated world professional middleweight karate champion. In 1997, he became the first man in the Western Hemisphere to be awarded an 8th-degree black belt grandmaster recognition in Taekwondo. Among his many students at those early karate studios were some names you might recognize: Steve McQueen, Bob Barker, Priscilla Presley. It was McQueen, in fact, who nudged Norris toward acting, suggesting he take it seriously. And it was another martial arts legend, Bruce Lee, who gave him his first real shot on screen. Lee cast Norris as his opponent in 1972's Way of the Dragon, and their fight sequence in the Roman Colosseum remains one of the most celebrated martial arts scenes in movie history. But Norris wasn't just Lee's opponent. The two trained together, shared a deep mutual respect, and remained friends until Lee's untimely death a year later. Norris took the lead in Breaker. In 1977, and when Good Guys Wear Black became a hit the following year, the action career was launched in earnest. Through the 1980s, he was one of the most bankable action stars in Hollywood. Missing in action in '84 was a personal project, a tribute to his younger brother Weiland, who had been killed in combat in Vietnam. Code of Silence in '85 earned him the best reviews of his career, and The Delta Force in '86, alongside Lee Marvin in his final film role, was a box office smash. But for many of you listening right now, the role you remember best came not on the big screen, but on the small one. From 1993 to 2001, Chuck Norris starred as Cordell Walker in Walker, Texas Ranger on CBS. Over 200 episodes, 8 seasons, and a couple of television movies. That show made him a household name not just in America, but around the world. Then, in 2005, something unexpected happened. The internet discovered Chuck Norris. The so-called Chuck Norris facts, absurd, hyperbolic jokes about his supposed invincibility, went viral in the early days of internet meme culture. They were among the first true internet memes. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down. Chuck Norris counted to infinity. Twice. Norris took it in stride, eventually publishing his own officially endorsed collection and naming his personal favorite. Before the boogeyman goes to sleep, he checks his closet for Chuck Norris. Off-screen, Norris devoted enormous energy to philanthropy. He co-founded Kickstart Kids, a program that teaches martial arts in middle schools as a way to build self-esteem and steer children away from drugs and gangs. The program grew to serve thousands of kids across dozens of schools. He was named an honorary United States Marine in 2007 for his support of the military, particularly wounded servicemen. On March 10, 2026, his 86th birthday, Norris posted a video of himself sparring with a trainer in Hawaii, punching a heavy bag with the kind of vigor that most men half his age would envy. He wrote, "I don't age, I level up." 9 days later, on March 19th, Chuck Norris died in Hawaii after a sudden medical emergency. His family described it as a sudden passing and said he was surrounded by loved ones and at peace. He had been alert and joking just the day before. As of this recording, arrangements for Chuck Norris's final resting place have not been publicly announced. He and his wife Gina owned a ranch in Navasota, Texas, where they had lived for many years. He is survived by 5 children, sons Mike and Eric from his first marriage, twins Dakota and Dana Lee with Gina, and daughter Dina. Whatever comes next, one thing is certain. The man who became the internet's ultimate tough guy was the real thing all along. A coal miner's nephew from Oklahoma who made himself into a world champion, a movie star, and an American icon. Our first cemetery stop takes us about as far from Oklahoma as you can get, and still be in the United States. We're in Seattle, Washington, on Capitol Hill, at Lakeview Cemetery. Founded in 1872, it sits on a gentle hillside with views of Lake Washington to the east. Many of Seattle's founding families are buried here. But the grave that draws 10,000 visitors a year, the one that Time magazine named one of the top 10 celebrity graves in the world, belongs to a man who wasn't born here, didn't die here, but made this city his American home. Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco in 1940 but grew up in Hong Kong, where his father was a Cantonese opera star. By his teens, he was already a child film actor and a street fighter, the second habit eventually getting him into enough trouble that his father sent him back to the United States at age 18. He landed in Seattle, where he finished high school, enrolled at the University of Washington, and opened his first martial arts school in the back of a parking garage. It was here in Seattle that Lee developed the philosophy that would change martial arts forever. He rejected the rigid formality of traditional styles and created his own approach, Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. He believed a fighter should be like water, formless, adaptable, able to flow or crash. That philosophy, radical at the time, is now the foundation of modern mixed martial arts. Lee was also a voracious reader and deep thinker. His personal library contained over 2,500 books on martial arts, philosophy, and self-improvement. Lee's first brush with American television fame came in 1966 as Kato in The Green Hornet. He was electric on screen, fast, precise, and bursting with a charisma that the camera loved. But Hollywood didn't know what to do with a Chinese leading man in the 1960s. He auditioned for the lead in the television series Kung Fu, a concept he himself had helped develop, but the network chose David Carradine instead, a decision that still stings for many of Lee's admirers. So, Lee returned to Hong Kong and became the biggest movie star in Asia, virtually overnight. The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and Way of the Dragon, the one featuring his famous fight with Chuck Norris in the Roman Colosseum, were massive hits that shattered box office records across Asia. Enter the Dragon, his masterpiece, was a co-production with Warner Brothers that was poised to make him an international superstar of a magnitude no Asian actor had achieved before. He never saw it released. On July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong at the age of 32. The cause was cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain, believed to have been triggered by an allergic reaction to a painkiller. He had complained of a headache, taken a pill, lain down for a nap, and never woke up. Enter the Dragon opened 6 days later and became a worldwide phenomenon. His family chose Seattle for his burial. It was the city where he'd grown to manhood, where he'd met his wife Linda, where he'd first taught his art. His grave is tucked behind a hedge halfway up the cemetery hill. a simple flat marker bearing his name and the dates of his life. And lying right beside him is his son. Brandon Lee was 28 years old and on the cusp of stardom when he was killed on March 31st, 1993, on the set of a film called The Crow. During a scene in which his character was supposed to be shot, a prop gun discharged a fragment that had been lodged in the barrel from a previous take. The fragment struck Brandon in the abdomen with the force of a real bullet. He died after 6 hours of surgery. The Crow was completed using a combination of doubles, rewrites, and early digital effects, and it became a cult classic, a bittersweet monument to an actor who seemed destined for great things. Father and son, side by side on a Seattle hillside, looking out toward the lake. Visitors come from all over the world and leave flowers, notes, and small tokens. 3 Mongolian men once walked 3,700 miles over 7 months just to stand here. From the evergreen hills of Seattle, let's head south to the sun-baked sprawl of Los Angeles, where more action legends rest than anywhere else on Earth. Our first stop is Hollywood Forever Cemetery, right on Santa Monica Boulevard, sharing a wall with the Paramount Studios lot. Douglas Fairbanks was the original action hero. Before there was a word for it, before stuntmen had a union, before special effects could fake a sword fight, there was Fairbanks, leaping, climbing, swinging from chandeliers, and grinning the whole time. In the 1920s, he was the biggest movie star in the world. The Mark of Zorro, The Three Musketeers, Robin Hood, The Thief of Baghdad. He didn't just star in swashbucklers, he invented the genre. He also co-founded United Artists alongside Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and his wife Mary Pickford, and served as the first president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Every action star who followed, every Errol Flynn, every Bruce Willis, every Tom Cruise hanging off the side of an airplane, owes a debt to the man who proved audiences would pay to watch someone do something dangerous and make it look fun. Fairbanks died of a heart attack in 1939 at the age of 56. His memorial here at Hollywood Forever is one of the cemetery's grandest, a reflecting pool and garden near the center of the grounds. Staying right here at Hollywood Forever, let's find another action pioneer resting in the Cathedral Mausoleum. Tyrone Power was the matinee idol of Hollywood's golden age, impossibly handsome, effortlessly charming, and surprisingly athletic. He starred in swashbucklers and adventure films like The Mark of Zorro, the 1940 remake Blood and Sand, The Black Swan, and Captain from Castile. But he was more than a pretty face with a sword. Power also turned in dramatic performances in films like Nightmare Alley and Witness for the Prosecution, his final completed film. What many people don't know about Tyrone Power is that when World War II broke out, he put his career on hold and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He trained as a pilot and flew cargo and troop transport missions in the Pacific, including during the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. He didn't seek a safe assignment. He flew into combat zones. Power returned to Hollywood after the war, but never quite recaptured the peak of his earlier fame. He continued making films, though, right up until November of 1958, when he collapsed on the set of Solomon and Sheba in Spain. He'd suffered a massive heart attack. He was 44 years old. The film was eventually completed with Yul Brynner replacing him. A short drive from Hollywood Forever brings us to Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, a sprawling and beautiful cemetery tucked into the mountains above the studios. This is where we'll find quite a few of our action legends, so let's settle in. In the Sheltering Hills section rests Errol Flynn, the man who made swashbuckling a legitimate movie career. Born in Hobart, Tasmania, in 1909, Flynn led the kind of adventurous life that would seem far-fetched if you put it in a screenplay. Before Hollywood, he'd been a gold prospector in New Guinea, a tobacco farmer, a sailor, a shipping clerk in Sydney, and, according to his own possibly embellished accounts, a smuggler and a diamond trader. He was expelled from nearly every school he attended. He arrived in Hollywood in the mid-1930s almost by accident, after a brief film career in England, and became a star virtually overnight with Captain Blood in 1935. Warner Brothers had initially wanted Robert Donat for the role, but Donat fell ill, and the unknown Australian got his shot. The Adventures of Robin Hood in '38, in which Flynn played the definitive Robin Hood in glorious Technicolor, is still considered one of the greatest adventure films ever made. The sword fight between Flynn and Basil Rathbone in that film is a marvel of choreography and showmanship. Flynn did much of the fencing himself, and he was good at it. He was equally dashing in the Seahawk, Dodge City, They Died with Their Boots On, and the Dawn Patrol. During World War II, he appeared in a string of war films, though he was unable to serve in the military due to a combination of health problems including a heart murmur, malaria he'd contracted in New Guinea, and recurring back pain. Off-screen, Flynn's life was equally colorful and often troubled. His appetites for alcohol, women, and reckless living were legendary and eventually caught up with him. In 1942, he was tried and acquitted on statutory rape charges involving 2 teenage girls. The trial was a sensation and damaged his reputation, even though he was cleared. The phrase "in like Flynn," meaning to achieve easy success, entered the American lexicon around this time, though its exact origin is debated. He wrote a best-selling autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, that was as entertaining and unreliable as the man himself. By his late 40s, he looked far older than his years, ravaged by decades of hard living. He died of a heart attack in Vancouver in 1959 at just 50. His doctor, performing the autopsy, reportedly said his internal organs looked like those of a 75-year-old man. He had lived, as one biographer put it, at triple speed, but what a ride it was. Nearby in these same Hollywood Hills grounds, in the Courts of Remembrance, we find the man they called the King of Cool. Well, not his grave exactly. Steve McQueen was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean near Santa Catalina Island, off the California coast. But this is as good a place as any to remember him, because McQueen is woven into the fabric of Los Angeles and its car culture as tightly as anyone who ever lived. Terrence Stephen McQueen had one of those childhoods that would break most people. Born in Beech Grove, Indiana, in 1930, abandoned by his father at 6 months, raised partly by grandparents on a Missouri farm, partly by a mother who struggled with alcoholism. He ended up in reform school as a teenager. He joined the Marines, served with distinction, including once saving the lives of 5 Marines during an Arctic exercise when their transport vehicle broke through the ice, and then used the GI Bill to study acting in New York. He became the biggest movie star in the world by doing something no one else did quite as well, being effortlessly cool while doing dangerous things. The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, where he performed many of his own motorcycle stunts. Bullet, with its legendary San Francisco car chase that changed action filmmaking forever. The Thomas Crown Affair, Papillon, The Towering Inferno. He was also the highest-paid actor in the world in 1974, pulling in $12 million for The Towering Inferno, the equivalent of about $76 million today. McQueen was as passionate about racing as he was about acting, competing professionally in both car and motorcycle events. Tragically, it may have been that passion that killed him. He was diagnosed with mesothelioma in 1979, a cancer linked to asbestos exposure. The likely culprit was the asbestos-lined fireproof suit he wore during his racing career. Seeking treatment that mainstream medicine couldn't offer, he traveled to a clinic in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. A massive tumor was removed, and the surgery was initially called a success. But just hours later, on November 7, 1980, Steve McQueen died of a heart attack. He was 50 years old. Here's a detail that gives you chills. McQueen had been among the celebrity targets on Charles Manson's list. He claimed to have had a dinner invitation at the home of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski on the night of the Tate murders in August of '69, but canceled at the last minute. Let's cross Los Angeles now and visit Westwood Village Memorial Park, a compact cemetery tucked between high-rises in one of LA's busiest neighborhoods. It's surprisingly small. You could walk the whole thing in 10 minutes. But the star power per square foot here is unmatched. Burt Lancaster rests here, one of the great physical performers in movie history. Before he was an actor, he was a circus acrobat. literally. Born in Harlem in 1913, Lancaster teamed up with a childhood friend to form an acrobat duo that performed in circuses and vaudeville throughout the 1930s. When an injury ended his circus career, he drifted into acting and discovered he was very, very good at it. Lancaster brought that athletic grace to the screen in a career that spanned 4 decades. He could be a swashbuckler in The Crimson Pirate, a hard-boiled convict in Brute Force, a doomed soldier in From Here to Eternity, where his embrace with Deborah Kerr in The Surf remains one of the most iconic images in movie history. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Elmer Gantry in 1960 and earned 4 nominations in total. He was also brilliant in Birdman of Alcatraz, 7 Days in May, and the haunting Italian epic The Leopard. What made Lancaster unusual among action stars was his intelligence and his willingness to take risks. He wasn't content just being a leading man. He formed his own production company in the 1950s, one of the first actors to do so, and used it to make challenging, unconventional films. He died from a heart attack in 1994 at the age of 80. His friend Kirk Douglas called him the most physical actor I ever worked with. Speaking of Kirk Douglas, he's here too, not far from Lancaster. The two were lifelong friends and frequent co-stars, most memorably in Gunfight at the OK, Corral and Tough Guys, in which they played aging criminals making one last score. Douglas, born Isur Danielevich in Amsterdam, New York in 1916, was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants who barely spoke English. His father was a ragman who collected junk with a horse and cart. There were 7 children and never enough money. Douglas worked his way through college as a janitor and, remarkably, as a professional wrestler. He competed under the name Kirk Douglas, liked the sound of it, and kept it, and eventually made it to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, then to Broadway, and then to Hollywood. Kirk Douglas was an action star of a different breed. He didn't just hit people. He inhabited characters with a ferocious intensity that could be genuinely frightening. That famous dimpled chin and those blazing eyes radiated a barely contained energy that directors loved to aim at big, physical roles. As Spartacus in the 1960 epic he both starred in and produced, he delivered one of cinema's most stirring moments of collective defiance. The defeated slaves rising one by one to shout, "I am Spartacus," remains one of the most emotionally powerful sequences ever filmed. Champion, in which he played a ruthless boxer willing to destroy everyone around him, earned him his first of 3 Oscar nominations. He was equally unforgettable in The Vikings alongside Tony Curtis, in Paths of Glory, Stanley Kubrick's devastating anti-war masterpiece, and in Ace in the Hole, one of the most cynical and prescient films about media exploitation ever made. He also did something behind the scenes that was arguably braver than anything he did on camera. Douglas hired the blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo to write Spartacus and insisted on giving him on-screen credit under his own name, not a pseudonym. This was an act of enormous professional courage that helped break the Hollywood blacklist, a McCarthy-era practice that had destroyed careers and ruined lives for over a decade. Kirk Douglas received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1981 and was given an honorary Academy Award in '96 for 50 years as a creative and moral force in the motion picture community. He survived a helicopter crash in '91. 2 people in the helicopter died, and a stroke in '96 that temporarily robbed him of speech. He fought back from both setbacks with the same stubborn intensity he brought to his roles. He died in February of 2020 at the astonishing age of 103, one of the very last surviving stars of Hollywood's golden age. His son Michael, himself an Oscar-winning actor, said simply, "He was an inspiration." Kirk rests here alongside his wife Ann and son Eric. Let's move out of LA proper now and head north about 20 minutes to Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, arguably the most famous cemetery in the world. This is where Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Spencer Tracy, and Walt Disney all ended up, among many others. And it's where we'll find a man who parted the Red Sea. Charlton Heston lies within the grounds of this park in a private area. The man born John Charles Carter in Evanston, Illinois in 1923 became the face of the Hollywood epic. Ben-Hur, for which he won the Academy Award for Best Actor, remains one of the most honored films in Oscar history. The chariot race in that film, performed largely by Heston himself, is still one of the most thrilling action sequences ever committed to celluloid. He was Moses in The Ten Commandments, Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar in El Cid, and Michelangelo in The Agony and the Ecstasy. But Heston was also an action star in a more modern sense. In 1968, he starred in Planet of the Apes, which launched one of the longest-running science fiction franchises in history. He followed it up with disaster films like Earthquake and Airport 1975 and the post-apocalyptic thriller The Omega Man. He was versatile enough to do it all. Off-screen, Heston marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1963 March on Washington and was an early and visible supporter of the Civil Rights Movement. He later became president of the National Rifle Association, a role that made him a polarizing figure in his final decades. Whatever your politics, nobody questioned his conviction. He had the same fierce certainty in real life that he brought to his most commanding roles. Heston was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2002 and died from pneumonia in 2008 at the age of 84. Let's leave California entirely now. Our next destination is about as far from Hollywood glamour as you can imagine. We're heading to the small town of West Windsor, Vermont, to a quiet hillside cemetery called Brownsville Cemetery. There are no movie studio walls in view here, no palm trees, just rolling green hills and a clear view of Mount Ascutney in the distance. This is where Charles Bronson is buried. Born Charles Dennis Buczynski, or Buczynski, depending on the source. In 1921 in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, Bronson grew up in a Lithuanian-American coal mining family so poor that the children shared a single pair of shoes. He was one of 15 children. As a boy, he went down into the mines just like his father and brothers. He later said he earned $1 for each ton of coal he mined. World War II pulled him out of the mines and into the Army Air Forces, where he served as a tail gunner on B-29 bombers in the Pacific. He flew 25 missions and was wounded in action, earning the Purple Heart. After the war, he used the GI Bill to study art and stumbled into acting. His face, that extraordinary, craggy, weathered face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the Pennsylvania mountains, wasn't conventional leading man material, but it was unforgettable. Bronson worked steadily in supporting roles through the 50s and 60s, appearing in some of the era's biggest ensemble action films. He was one of the Magnificent Seven alongside Steve McQueen. He was in The Great Escape, again alongside McQueen. He was in The Dirty Dozen. But the role that made him a genuine star came in 1974 when he played Paul Kersey in Death Wish, a New York architect who becomes a vigilante after criminals murder his wife and assault his daughter. The film was controversial and hugely successful, spawning 4 sequels. Love it or hate it, Death Wish made Bronson one of the biggest box office draws in the world. In 1971, he received a Golden Globe as the most popular actor in the world. Before Death Wish, though, Bronson had already become a legend in Europe, particularly for his role as the harmonica-playing gunslinger in Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968, widely considered one of the greatest westerns ever made. Bronson and his second wife, actress Jill Ireland, were married for over 2 decades and appeared together in 15 films. When Ireland died of breast cancer in 1990, Bronson was devastated. He had her ashes placed inside a walking cane that he carried with him for the rest of his life. When he died in 2003 at the age of 81 from pneumonia complicated by metastatic lung cancer, he was buried here in Vermont, on the grounds near the 400-acre farm called Zulika, where he and Jill had raised their family. The cane went into the ground with him. They are together still. From the quiet of Vermont, let's travel to a place that, strictly speaking, isn't a cemetery at all. We're headed across the Atlantic, to the coast of Scotland and the warm waters of the Bahamas, because the original James Bond didn't leave behind a grave. Sir Sean Connery was born Thomas Sean Connery in 1930 in the Fountain Bridge neighborhood of Edinburgh. Before he was the most famous spy in cinema history, he was a milkman, a lorry driver, a coffin polisher, an artist's model for the Edinburgh College of Art. and a bodybuilder who finished third in the 1950 Mr. Universe competition. At 23, he had a choice between becoming a professional footballer or an actor. He chose acting, and he later called it one of his more intelligent decisions. In 1962, producer Albert Broccoli and director Terrence Young cast the relatively unknown Connery as James Bond in Dr. No. It was a gamble. Ian Fleming, who created Bond in his novels, wasn't initially pleased with the choice, reportedly saying Connery was an overgrown stuntman. He changed his mind. Connery's Bond was suave, dangerous, witty, and magnetic, and audiences went wild. He played Bond in 7 films spanning 2 decades, from Dr. No through Never Say Never Again in '83. But Connery always wanted to be more than Bond, and he proved it. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for The Untouchables in 1987, playing an Irish beat cop alongside Kevin Costner. He was Harrison Ford's father in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. He was mesmerizing in The Man Who Would Be King, The Name of the Rose, and The Hunt for Red October. People magazine named him the sexiest man alive in 1989, at age 59, and the sexiest man of the century in '99. Connery was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 2000. He retired from acting in 2006 and spent his final years at his home in Lyford Cay in the Bahamas. He died peacefully in his sleep on October 31, 2020, at the age of 90. His widow later revealed he had been suffering from dementia in his final years. He was cremated in the Bahamas, and in 2022, his ashes were scattered in Scotland at places he loved, including near the Old Course at St. Andrews and in his childhood neighborhood of Fountainbridge. The man who became the world's most famous spy came home. Another Bond, another resting place far from Hollywood. Sir Roger Moore, who succeeded Connery and played 007 in 7 films of his own, more than any other actor, died in 2017 at the age of 89 from cancer. Moore's Bond was smoother, funnier, and more self-aware than Connery's, reflecting Moore's own personality. Where Connery was a coiled spring, Moore was a raised eyebrow. He brought a lightness to the role that suited the increasingly fantastical direction the franchise took in the '70s, with films like The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. Before Bond, he'd been a television star for years, best known as Simon Templar in The Saint, which ran for over 150 episodes in the '60s, and as Lord Brett Sinclair in The Persuaders, alongside Tony Curtis, whom we visited earlier in Las Vegas. Moore was born in Stockwell, London, in 1927 and studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art before working as a model and then breaking into film and television. He was never a natural tough guy. He freely admitted that he couldn't throw a convincing punch and that his fight scenes required careful choreography. But he brought such charm and wit to Bond that audiences didn't care. He also starred in several non-Bond action films, including The Wild Geese and North Sea Hijack. In his later years, Moore became a passionate humanitarian, serving as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for over 2 decades, traveling to war zones and disaster areas around the world. He said the work was more important to him than any film he'd ever made. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 2003. Moore was buried in a private ceremony in Monaco, where he had lived for many years, in a quiet spot overlooking the Mediterranean. Back across the Atlantic now, back to California, and to Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills once more. We've got several more stops to make here. In the Sheltering Hills section, not far from Errol Flynn, lies Lee Van Cleef, one of the most distinctive faces in Western cinema. Those piercing, narrow eyes. A casting director once told him he'd never work in Hollywood because his eyes were too mean-looking. It turned out those eyes were exactly what the movies needed. Van Cleef spent years playing heavies in Hollywood westerns, always the villain, always reliable, never the star. Then Sergio Leone came calling. Leone cast Van Cleef alongside Clint Eastwood in For a Few Dollars More in '65, and then as the ruthless Angel Eyes in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in '66. Those 2 films transformed Van Cleef from a character actor into an international star, particularly in Europe. He went on to star in dozens more westerns, including Sabata and The Big Gun Down. He also appeared in John Carpenter's Escape from New York as the sinister police commissioner Bob Houck. Before Hollywood, Van Cleef served in the United States Navy during World War II aboard minesweepers and saw action during the invasion of southern France. He was a genuine war veteran playing gunslingers on screen. Van Cleef died of a heart attack in 1989 at the age of 64. Also, here at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills, in the Courts of Remembrance, we find David Carradine. If Bruce Lee opened the door for martial arts in American entertainment, David Carradine walked through it, literally, as Kwai Chang Caine in the television series Kung Fu, which ran from 1972 to 75. The show made Carradine a counterculture icon, the wandering Shaolin monk in the American Old West, choosing peace but capable of devastating force. There's a painful irony to the casting. Bruce Lee had pitched the concept for Kung Fu and was widely expected to star in it. When the network chose the non-Asian Carradine instead, Lee left for Hong Kong, where he made the films that would make him a global legend. Carradine later acknowledged the controversy, and in some ways, the two men's careers remained intertwined, linked by a show that changed American television. Carradine revived the role of Caine in the 90s and found a major career resurgence in 2003 when Quentin Tarantino cast him as the title character in Kill Bill Volume 1 and its sequel. It was a role that showcased everything Carradine could do: menace, charisma, quiet authority, and introduced him to a new generation. David Carradine died in Bangkok, Thailand, in June of 2009 at the age of 72. The circumstances were unusual and widely reported. He was found in his hotel room closet, and his death was determined to have been caused by accidental asphyxiation. He was in Thailand filming a movie at the time. Let's leave Forest Lawn for a spell and head down to Arlington, Virginia, to the most sacred burial ground in America, Arlington National Cemetery. Among the more than 400,000 service members laid to rest on these rolling hills are two men who became action legends, though their paths to stardom could not have been more different. The first is Audie Murphy, the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. Born in 1925 on a sharecropper's farm in Kingston, Texas, Murphy was one of 12 children. His father abandoned the family, and his mother died when he was a teenager. He tried to enlist in every branch of the military after Pearl Harbor, but was turned away by the Marines and the paratroopers for being too short and too skinny. The Army finally took him at age 17 after his sister helped him falsify his birth date. What followed was one of the most extraordinary combat records in American history. Murphy fought in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany. He earned every combat award the United States Army offered, including the Medal of Honor for single-handedly holding off an entire company of German soldiers at the Colmar Pocket in France in January of 1945. During that engagement, he climbed atop a burning tank destroyer, which was loaded with ammunition and in danger of exploding at any moment, and used its mounted machine gun to repel the advancing Germans for nearly an hour while wounded and out of ammunition for his own weapon. He killed or wounded approximately 50 enemy soldiers. He was 20 years old. By the war's end, he had earned 33 awards and decorations, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, and 3 Purple Hearts. After the war, James Cagney invited Murphy to Hollywood. He appeared in over 40 films, mostly westerns, and starred in the 1955 film based on his own autobiography, To Hell and Back, which was Universal's highest-grossing picture until it was surpassed by Jaws 20 years later. Murphy was honest about the toll the war had taken on him, speaking publicly about what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder long before most veterans felt they could. He suffered from nightmares, insomnia, and depression for the rest of his life, and he advocated for better treatment of veterans struggling with the invisible wounds of combat. In an era when admitting to psychological suffering was seen as weakness, Murphy's willingness to speak openly about it was an act of courage that rivaled anything he did on the battlefield. Murphy's post-war years were also marked by financial difficulties and a gambling problem. Despite being the most decorated soldier of the war, he was not a wealthy man when he died. On May 28, 1971, Murphy was a passenger in a private plane that crashed in fog and rain near Catawba, Virginia. He was 45 years old. His grave at Arlington, near the amphitheater, is one of the most visited in the cemetery, second only to President Kennedy's. The headstone is a standard military marker, same as every other soldier's. He wouldn't have wanted it any other way. The other action legend at Arlington is Lee Marvin. Born in New York City in 1924 to a well-to-do family, his father was an advertising executive and his mother was a fashion editor. Marvin was expelled from multiple schools for behavioral problems before enlisting in the Marines at 18. He served as a scout sniper in the 4th Marine Division and saw heavy combat in the Pacific, including the assault on the Marshall Islands and the Battle of Saipan, where he was seriously wounded by a Japanese machine gunner. The bullet severed his sciatic nerve and left him in military hospitals for over a year. He would carry that wound and the psychological scars of combat for the rest of his life. He walked with a slight limp, and those who knew him said the war left him with a deep fury that he channeled directly into his acting. Marvin became one of the most compelling tough guys in movie history. He could play villains with terrifying conviction. His role in The Big Heat, where he throws hot coffee in Gloria Graham's face, is one of the most shocking moments in 50s cinema. As the leader of the thugs in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, he was menacing enough to make even John Wayne look uncertain. But he could also play heroes, or something complicated in between. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Cat Ballou in 1965, a Western comedy in which he played a dual role as both a drunken, broken-down gunfighter and his evil twin brother. It remains one of the most entertaining Oscar-winning performances ever, and Marvin reportedly showed up to the ceremony already half drunk. Marvin went on to star in The Dirty Dozen, a massive ensemble action hit in which he played the tough-as-nails Major Reisman, whipping a group of military prisoners into a fighting unit. Point Blank, a stylish and violent noir thriller, and The Professionals, a Western adventure alongside Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan. He also became the center of a landmark legal case in 1979, when his former live-in partner Michelle Triola Marvin sued him for palimony. The case established new legal precedents regarding the rights of unmarried partners and added the word palimony to the American vocabulary. His final film was The Delta Force in 1986, alongside Chuck Norris, whom we honored at the start of our tour. Marvin was reportedly in poor health during filming but insisted on finishing the picture. He died from a heart attack in 1987 at the age of 63. As a combat-wounded Marine veteran, he was entitled to burial at Arlington with full military honors. His headstone, like all the others here, is a simple white marble marker. No mention of Hollywood, just his name, his rank, private first class, and his dates of service. It is exactly the kind of unadorned, no-nonsense tribute Lee Marvin would have wanted. From the solemn rows of Arlington, let's travel south to the flatlands of Florida, to a town called Jupiter. Here, at Riverview Memorial Park, rests a man who might be the most charming action star who ever lived. Burt Reynolds was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1936, but grew up in Riverview, Florida, and always considered himself a Florida boy. He was a high school and college football star, good enough to earn a scholarship to Florida State, and good enough, by some accounts, to have been drafted by the Baltimore Colts. A car accident and a knee injury ended those dreams, but they led him to acting classes and a new career was born. Reynolds became one of the biggest movie stars of the 1970s and early 80s, and he did it with a wink. Smokey and the Bandit, the 18-wheeler romp he made with Jackie Gleason, was the second highest-grossing film of 1977, behind only Star Wars. He followed it with The Longest Yard, Semi-Tough, Hooper, The Cannonball Run, and a string of good-natured action comedies that made him the #1 box office star in America for 5 consecutive years, from 78 to 82. No actor had held that title for that long since Bing Crosby. Reynolds was famous for doing his own stunts, a tradition he picked up from his friend and stunt coordinator Hal Needham, who had actually been his roommate during their lean years and went on to direct Smokey and the Bandit. He was also famous for that iconic 1972 Cosmopolitan centerfold, the first nude centerfold of a man in a major American magazine, his mustache, and his long and very public relationship with Sally Field. When he won the Golden Globe for his performance in Boogie Nights, he reportedly threw the award in the trash because he hated the film. He later admitted he regretted not appreciating what Paul Thomas Anderson had created. Reynolds also had a serious dramatic side that sometimes got lost in the shuffle. He was tremendous in Deliverance in 1972, a film that showed he could carry a harrowing thriller as effectively as a comedy. And he earned that Academy Award nomination for Boogie Nights in '97, playing a pornography director in a role that required real vulnerability. He also did decades of generous work in dinner theater and regional productions, never forgetting the stage roots that had nurtured him. Reynolds had open-heart surgery in 2009 and struggled with health issues in his later years. He died from cardiac arrest on September 6, 2018, at the age of 82. At the time of his death, he had been working on a memoir and was set to appear in Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a role that eventually went to Bruce Dern. He was buried here in Jupiter, Florida, the place where he grew up and the place he always called home. Let's head back west, back to Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, for one more stop. In this small but star-packed cemetery rests James Coburn, a man who could convey more menace with a single grin than most actors could manage with a loaded gun. Born in Laurel, Nebraska in 1928, Coburn studied acting under Stella Adler and began appearing in television westerns in the late 50s. He first made an impression in the movies as the knife-throwing Brit in The Magnificent Seven. He was in that film alongside McQueen and Bronson, all three of whom we've already visited today. Coburn went on to star in The Great Escape, again with McQueen and Bronson, and in the offbeat Bond spoof Our Man Flint, which gave him his own swinging 60s spy franchise. Coburn was tall, lean, and always looked like he knew something you didn't. He was also deeply interested in martial arts and studied under Bruce Lee. In the 70s and 80s, he appeared in films like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Cross of Iron, and The Muppet Movie. Yes, The Muppet Movie. For decades, Coburn suffered from severe rheumatoid arthritis that at times left him barely able to use his hands. He tried every treatment available and credited a sulfur-based supplement with finally bringing his symptoms under control enough to resume working full-time. That comeback led to an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Affliction in 1998, a role he took at age 70. He died from a heart attack in 2002 at the age of 74. Our next stop takes us to a cemetery that's a bit of a surprise. We're heading south to Palm Memorial Park in Henderson, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas. Here lies Tony Curtis, one of the most versatile leading men of the Golden Age. Curtis was born Bernard Schwartz in the Bronx in 1925, the son of Hungarian Jewish immigrants. He grew up in poverty, and his childhood was marked by hardship. His younger brother was killed by a truck when Curtis was 8, and the family struggled financially throughout the Depression. After serving in the Navy during World War II, he was aboard a submarine tender in the Pacific and was present in Tokyo Bay when the Japanese signed the Instrument of Surrender aboard the USS Missouri. He studied acting on the GI Bill at the dramatic workshop of the New School in New York. His good looks and energy got him a contract at Universal, and his talent did the rest. Curtis was an action star, a romantic lead, a comedian, and a dramatic actor, and he could switch between those modes with a facility that critics sometimes underestimated. He was terrific in swashbucklers like The Black Shield of Falworth, The Prince Who Was a Thief, and The Vikings, where he did many of his own stunts alongside Kirk Douglas. He earned an Academy Award nomination for The Defiant Ones, in which he and Sidney Poitier played escaped convicts chained together. A powerful statement about race relations that was considered daring in 1958. And he was unforgettable in Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot, widely considered one of the greatest comedies ever made, playing opposite Marilyn Monroe and Jack Lemmon while impersonating a woman for most of the film. His dead-on Cary Grant impression in that movie is one of the great comic performances in cinema. Curtis was also a skilled escape artist. He'd studied with Harry Houdini's brother, and he used those skills in The Great Imposter and other films. He was married 6 times, a record even by Hollywood standards. His second wife was actress Janet Leigh, and together they were the parents of Jamie Lee Curtis, who has spoken eloquently about her complicated relationship with her father. Later in life, Tony Curtis became a serious and accomplished painter whose work sold for thousands of dollars, and he became something of a Las Vegas fixture, which is why he ended up here in Nevada rather than in Hollywood. He died from cardiac arrest in 2010 at the age of 85. From Las Vegas, let's drive north through the desert and into the high country of New Mexico. In the tiny village of Ranchos de Taos, in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, there's a small cemetery called Jesus Nazareno Cemetery beside the famous San Francisco de Asís Mission Church, the same church Georgia O'Keeffe painted multiple times, its massive adobe walls catching the southwestern light. And here, in this ancient and beautiful place, we find the grave of Dennis Hopper. Now, Dennis Hopper wasn't a traditional action star. He was something wilder, something more unpredictable, something that made casting directors simultaneously excited and terrified. Born in Dodge City, Kansas in 1936, yes, really, Dodge City, Hopper was a rebel from the start. He studied under Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, worked alongside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, and took Dean's death in '55 extremely hard. He clashed with directors so regularly and so spectacularly that he became virtually unemployable in mainstream Hollywood during the early 1960s. Henry Hathaway allegedly made him do a single scene over 80 times during the filming of From Hell to Texas. Then, in 1969, he co-wrote, directed, and starred in Easy Rider alongside Peter Fonda and Jack Nicholson. The film cost $400,000 and grossed over $60 million. It changed American cinema forever, launching the new Hollywood era and proving that counterculture stories about drugs, freedom, and the open road could find massive audiences. The film's ending, shocking, violent, and utterly bleak, said something about America that audiences in 1969 needed to hear, even if they didn't want to. Hopper followed it with The Last Movie, an experimental film shot in Peru that was an artistic and commercial disaster, and then spiraled into years of drug and alcohol abuse that are difficult to overstate. At the peak of his addiction, he was reportedly consuming half a gallon of rum, 28 beers, and 3 grams of cocaine per day. How he survived is something of a medical mystery. His comeback was spectacular. After getting sober, Hopper delivered 2 of the most memorable performances of the 1980s in a single year. The deranged nitrous oxide huffing Frank Booth in David Lynch's Blue Velvet, a villain so disturbing that audiences literally recoiled, and the doomed, whiskey-soaked assistant coach in Hoosiers, which earned him an Oscar nomination. He went on to become one of the great screen villains of the action genre, appearing in Speed as the bomber who wires a city bus to explode, Waterworld as the eye-patch-wearing pirate deacon, and dozens of other films where his unhinged energy was exactly what the scene required. Hopper was also a serious visual artist and photographer, and an avid art collector. He loved New Mexico with a passion. He had lived in Taos since the 60s, off and on, drawn to the light, the landscape, and the community of artists and misfits who'd been coming there since the days of D.H. Lawrence and Mabel Dodge Lujan. He died of prostate cancer in May of 2010 at the age of 74. More than 200 people attended his funeral at the San Francisco de Asís Mission Church. He's buried right next door in this humble churchyard, where the high desert sun bakes the red earth and the mountains loom against a sky so blue it doesn't look real. For a man who spent his life searching for something, in films, in drugs, in art, in the vast American landscape, it feels like he finally found the right place to rest. Heading back to Los Angeles, let's stop at Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City. This is primarily a Jewish cemetery, and among its most notable residents is a man best known for a television role, but whose action hero credentials are real. Michael Landon, born Eugene Maurice Orowitz in 1936 in Forest Hills, Queens, became one of the most beloved figures in American television. He starred in 3 of the longest-running shows in TV history: Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and Highway to Heaven. On Bonanza, which ran from 1959 to 1973, Landon played Little Joe Cartwright, the youngest of the Cartwright brothers. The show featured regular fistfights, shootouts, and horse chases, and Landon did much of his own stunt work. But Landon was much more than an actor. He wrote and directed episodes of all three of his major shows and was known as a perfectionist and a workhorse. He also appeared in the 1957 film I Was a Teenage Werewolf, one of the most successful low-budget horror films of the 50s, making him one of the few people to play both a werewolf and a prairie farmer over the course of a career. In April of 1991, Landon was diagnosed with pancreatic and liver cancer. He went public with the diagnosis immediately and appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where he talked openly about his illness. He died on July 1, 1991, at the age of 54. More than 500 people attended his funeral, including fellow actors, crew members from his shows, and fans who simply wanted to say goodbye. Let's cross town to Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale. The original Forest Lawn, the one with the sweeping lawns and the grand architecture. Here in the Freedom Mausoleum we find Ernest Borgnine, an action star of the old school who could play a savage villain and a lovable everyman with equal conviction. Born Hermes Efron Borgnino in 1917 in Hamden, Connecticut, to Italian immigrant parents, Borgnini served 10 years in the United States Navy, including during World War II aboard the destroyer USS Lamberton. After the war, at his mother's suggestion, he tried acting. His face, round, gap-toothed, undeniably distinctive, wasn't typical leading man material. But like Bronson, it was impossible to forget. Borgnine won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Marty in 1955, playing a lonely Bronx butcher in a performance of stunning tenderness. But he was equally powerful in action roles, the sadistic sergeant in From Here to Eternity, the volatile crew member in The Dirty Dozen, the gruff commander in The Poseidon Adventure, and the voice of Mermaid Man on SpongeBob SquarePants, a role he played for 15 years and that made him a hero to an entirely new generation. He was married 5 times. His marriage to Ethel Merman lasted 32 days. He lived to 95 years old and was active nearly to the end, passing away from kidney failure in July of 2012. A Navy man to the last, he was reportedly wearing his Navy ring when he died. Staying in Los Angeles, let's visit Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills one more time. Here, in the Lincoln Terrace section, rests James Garner, one of the most naturally likable actors to ever grace a screen. Born James Scott Bumgarner in Norman, Oklahoma, in 1928, Garner had a rough childhood. His mother died when he was 4, and his stepmother was abusive. He served in the Korean War with the United States Army, earning 2 Purple Hearts. One of those wounds came from friendly fire from a fellow American soldier. Garner became a star on television as Brett Maverick in the Western series Maverick, which debuted in 1957. The role was perfect for him. A charming, wisecracking gambler who preferred talking his way out of trouble but could throw a punch when necessary. He reprised the character decades later. On film, he starred in The Great Escape alongside McQueen, Bronson, and Coburn, and if you're keeping count, that's 4 members of the Great Escape cast we've visited on this tour so far. He also starred in Grand Prix, the war film The Americanization of Emily, and 2 romantic comedies with Doris Day. But for many of you, the role you remember best is Jim Rockford in The Rockford Files, which ran from 1974 to 80. Rockford, the ex-con turned private detective who lived in a trailer on a Malibu beach, drove a gold Pontiac Firebird and could throw a mean punch while somehow remaining the most reasonable person in the room. Maybe the greatest private eye character in television history. The role earned Garner an Emmy Award. Garner was known as one of the nicest people in Hollywood. He was married to the same woman, Lois Clark, for 58 years, and his co-stars universally praised his generosity and professionalism. He suffered a stroke in 2008 and died from cardiac arrest in July of 2014 at the age of 86. Now let's take a long flight. We're crossing the Pacific to Japan to honor a man who was as vital to the action genre as any American star, though his films were made a world away. If you've only ever watched American movies, you may not know this man's name, but you felt his influence in every action film you've ever loved. Toshiro Mifune is buried at a temple in Kawasaki, near Tokyo. Born in 1920 in Qingdao, China, to Japanese parents who ran a photography studio, Mifune grew up in Manchuria and served as an aerial photographer in the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. After the war, he stumbled into the film industry almost by accident, answering a newspaper advertisement for new talent at the Toho Film Company. The story goes that he was so fierce during his screen test, prowling around the stage like a caged animal, breathing hard, radiating an almost frightening intensity, that the other applicants were intimidated into silence. Most of the judges wanted to reject him. Director Akira Kurosawa, watching from the back of the room, was fascinated. He saw in Mifune something raw and untamed that could not be taught. The partnership between Mifune and Kurosawa, often compared to the collaboration between John Ford and John Wayne, produced some of the greatest films ever made. Rashomon, which introduced Japanese cinema to Western audiences and won the Golden Lion at Venice in 1951. Seven Samurai, a 3.5-hour epic about a band of warriors defending a village of peasants that is as thrilling today as it was in 1954. Yojimbo, in which Mifune played a world-weary ronin playing two rival gangs against each other with cool amusement. Throne of Blood, a devastating adaptation of Macbeth set in feudal Japan. The Hidden Fortress, an adventure film told partly from the perspective of two bickering peasants that directly inspired George Lucas when he was writing Star Wars. Mifune could convey the weight of a warrior's burden, the fury of a cornered animal, or the sly wit of a mercenary for hire, often in the same scene. His performance in Seven Samurai, wild-haired, fierce, half-mad, and ultimately heartbreaking as the farmer's son pretending to be a samurai, is one of the towering achievements in the history of cinema, and quite possibly the single greatest action performance ever filmed. His influence on Western action cinema is incalculable. George Lucas has openly acknowledged that The Hidden Fortress inspired Star Wars. The droids C-3PO and R2-D2 are based on the two peasants in that film. Sergio Leone remade Yojimbo as A Fistful of Dollars, launching Clint Eastwood's career as a movie star. The Magnificent Seven was a direct remake of Seven Samurai. Every tough, taciturn action hero who lets his sword, or his gun, do the talking owes a debt to Toshiro Mifune. Every filmmaker who stages a battle in the rain owes him something. The modern action film, in ways both obvious and invisible, was built on his shoulders. Later in his career, Mifune appeared in several American productions, including the miniseries Shogun, in which he played Lord Toranaga to great acclaim, and the war epic Midway, in which he portrayed Admiral Yamamoto. In his final years, he suffered from health problems and withdrew from public life. He died from organ failure in December of 1997 at the age of 77. In Japan, he is revered as one of the greatest cultural figures of the 20th century. In America, he remains one of the best-kept secrets in cinema, a man whose work changed everything, even for audiences who have never seen his face. Back to the States now, and to a man who brought a different kind of action to the screen. We're visiting the grave of Jim Brown, the football legend turned movie star, who died in May of 2023 at his home in Los Angeles at the age of 87. Brown is widely considered the greatest running back in NFL history. In 9 seasons with the Cleveland Browns, from 1957 to 65, he led the league in rushing 8 times, never missed a game, and retired at his peak, at age 29, on top of his game, a move that stunned the sports world. To this day, many football analysts consider his decision to walk away at his prime the greatest retirement in professional sports history. He retired because he had found something else he wanted to do: make movies. The immediate cause was practical. He was filming The Dirty Dozen in England, and the production ran long, causing him to miss the start of training camp. When Brown's owner, Art Modell, threatened to fine him, Brown decided he was done with football. He transitioned to Hollywood and became one of the first African-American action stars, appearing in The Dirty Dozen. There's that film again, the fifth member of its cast we've encountered on this tour. Ice Station Zebra, 100 Rifles, and many others. In 100 Rifles, his love scene with Raquel Welch was one of the first interracial love scenes in a major Hollywood film, and it generated enormous controversy at the time. Brown didn't care. He never cared much about controversy. Off-screen, Brown was a civil rights activist who organized a historic summit in Cleveland in 1967 with Muhammad Ali, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and other black athletes to support Ali's refusal to serve in the Vietnam War. That meeting, held in Brown's office, was a pivotal moment in the intersection of sports and social justice. Later in life, Brown founded the Amer ICANN program, which worked to reduce gang violence in Los Angeles. His personal life was not without serious controversy, including multiple allegations of violence against women, which cast a shadow over his legacy, even as his athletic and cultural achievements remained undeniable. Brown died in his sleep on May 18, 2023, at his home in Los Angeles. He was 87, he was cremated, and a celebration of his life was held in Los Angeles. Speaking of Raquel Welch, she deserves her own stop on this tour, even though she might not be the first name you think of as an action legend. But consider the evidence. Welch starred in Fantastic Voyage, in which she was shrunk to microscopic size and injected into a human body, one of the most inventive science fiction premises of the 60s. She starred in 1 Million Years BC, whose poster image of her in a fur bikini became one of the most reproduced photographs of the 20th century. She starred in Bandolero alongside Dean Martin and Jimmy Stewart, and in Hannie Calder, in which she played a gun-slinging woman seeking vengeance against the men who attacked her. A revenge western that was decades ahead of its time in putting a woman at the center of an action story. And she won a Golden Globe for The Three Musketeers, in which she held her own alongside Oliver Reed and Michael York. She did her own stunts whenever possible and brought an athletic intensity to her roles that was unusual for female stars of her era. She was also a genuine physical fitness pioneer, releasing a best-selling exercise book and video in the 80s that helped launch the home workout craze. Born Jo Raquel Tejada in Chicago in 1940 to a Bolivian-born father and an English-American mother, Welch became one of the most iconic sex symbols of the 60s and 70s. But she bristled at the label her entire life, insisting she be taken seriously as an actress, which she was, particularly in her stage work. She replaced Lauren Bacall in the Broadway production of Woman of the Year and earned strong reviews. She also gave a critically acclaimed dramatic performance in the television film Right to Die. She died in February of 2023 at the age of 82 from cardiac arrest. Her family held a private service, and further details of her final resting place have not been made public. Another loss that shook the action world was Carl Weathers, who died in his sleep on February 1, 2024, at the age of 76. Before he was an actor, Weathers played professional football. He was a linebacker, briefly for the Oakland Raiders in 1970 and 71, and then in the Canadian Football League with the BC Lions. When his football career wound down, he turned to acting, studying at San Francisco State and taking small television roles. His breakout came when Sylvester Stallone cast him as Apollo Creed in Rocky in 1976. The story goes that Weathers came in to audition and, unimpressed with the actors reading opposite him, told the casting directors he could do better than any of them. That confidence was exactly what Stallone was looking for. Weathers created one of the most memorable characters in action movie history, the flashy, charismatic heavyweight champion who gives the unknown Rocky Balboa his shot at the title. Apollo was inspired in part by Muhammad Ali, and Weathers brought Ali's showmanship, pride, and underlying intelligence to the role. He reprised it in 3 Rocky sequels, and by the end of the series, Apollo had transformed from antagonist to ally to martyr, his death in the ring in Rocky IV becoming one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the franchise. Weathers brought such depth and dignity to Apollo that the character became as beloved as Rocky himself. Weathers went on to appear in Predator alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger. Their arm-clasping handshake became one of the most memed images in action movie history, and starred in Action Jackson. For a younger generation, he was Greef Karga in The Mandalorian, a role that earned him widespread critical praise and introduced him to millions of new fans. He also directed episodes of that series, showcasing a talent behind the camera that matched his presence in front of it. And he had a memorably funny recurring role on the sitcom Arrested Development, playing a fictionalized version of himself who was pathologically frugal. Weathers was cremated, and details of his memorial were kept private by his family. Let's visit a few more action legends whose final resting places take us to some unexpected corners of the world. We're going to Ireland first, to the small town of Churchtown in County Cork. Here lies Oliver Reed, one of the most ferociously talented and ferociously thirsty actors the British Isles ever produced. Born in 1938 in Wimbledon, London, Reed had the build of a boxer and the instincts of a natural screen presence. He became a star through the Hammer horror films of the early 60s, then transitioned into serious dramatic work. His performance as Bill Sikes in Oliver in 1968 was chilling. He was equally powerful in Women in Love, The Three Musketeers, and Tommy, but Reed was as famous for his drinking as for his acting. The stories are legendary and frequently verifiable. Bar brawls, wild nights, incidents involving snakes and fire hydrants, and quantities of alcohol that would hospitalize most humans. He once arm wrestled his way through an entire rugby team in a pub. His final role was also his finest in years. In 1999, Reed was cast as Proximo, the retired gladiator turned slave trader in Ridley Scott's Gladiator. He died during filming on May 2nd while on a break in a pub in Valletta, Malta. According to witnesses, he had been drinking with several members of the crew, reportedly consuming, among other things, 3 bottles of rum, 8 bottles of beer, and several double whiskeys. He collapsed and died of a heart attack. He was 61. The filmmakers completed his scenes using a combination of outtakes, a body double, and early digital face replacement technology. Reed's performance in the finished film is magnificent. He's buried here in Churchtown, where he had lived with his wife Josephine. While we're in the British Isles, let's remember another great Irish-born action star. Richard Harris was born in Limerick in 1930 and grew up wanting to play rugby for Ireland, a dream that ended when he contracted tuberculosis as a young man. He turned to acting instead and enrolled at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. It was a fortunate detour for the rest of us. Harris burst onto the international scene in This Sporting Life in 1963, a raw and physically punishing performance as a Yorkshire rugby player that earned him an Academy Award nomination and established him as an actor of extraordinary intensity. He was equally riveting in his action roles. In A Man Called Horse in 1970, he played an English nobleman captured by the Lakota Sioux, and the film's harrowing Sundance ceremony sequence, in which Harris's character is suspended by hooks through his chest, remains one of the most intense scenes in 70s cinema. Harris insisted on performing much of it himself. He returned for 2 sequels. In Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven in '92, he played the deadly gunfighter English Bob with a courtly menace that was chilling. And in The Wild Geese, he joined Roger Moore and Richard Burton in a rousing mercenary adventure set in Africa. Harris was also a singer of some note. His recording of MacArthur Park, with its famously surreal lyrics about a cake left out in the rain, hit number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1968. And for a whole new generation, he was Albus Dumbledore in the first 2 Harry Potter films, bringing warmth, authority, and a twinkle of mischief to the beloved headmaster. Harris was reportedly determined to continue playing Dumbledore despite declining health, and told friends he would do it until the end. He very nearly did. Harris died in October of 2002 from Hodgkin's disease at the age of 72. He had been a legendary drinker in his younger years. He and his friend Peter O'Toole were famously rowdy companions in London and beyond, but had given up alcohol in his later decades. He was cremated, and his ashes were reportedly scattered in the Bahamas, where he had a home. Crossing back over the Atlantic, let's return to the American South. We're heading to Hollywood, Florida, not the one in California, to Jupiter, and then further south. But first, a stop at Westwood once more. Paul Newman doesn't have a traditional grave either. Born in Shaker Heights, Ohio in 1925, Newman served in the Navy during World War II as a radio man and gunner in torpedo bombers in the Pacific. He wanted to be a pilot, but was turned down because he was colorblind. After the war, he studied acting at the Yale School of Drama and at the Actors Studio in New York. Newman became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood and arguably the finest actor of his generation. His action credentials are impeccable. Cool Hand Luke, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, The Towering Inferno, and many more. He was also an Academy Award winner for The Color of Money and a competitive auto racer who raced professionally well into his 70s. He and his wife, Joanne Woodward, were married for 50 years, making them one of Hollywood's most enduring couples. But perhaps Newman's greatest legacy is Newman's Own, the food company he founded in 1982. Every single penny of profit, over $600 million to date, has been donated to charity. Newman died from lung cancer in September of 2008 at the age of 83. His ashes were scattered privately, and no public funeral was held. He once said he wanted to be remembered as a guy who tried to be part of his times, tried to help people communicate with one another, tried to find some decency in his own life, tried to extend himself as a human being. Let's talk about another kind of action star, the kind who became a star before anyone even called the genre action. We're heading to the grounds of a church in Los Angeles, specifically the columbarium at St. Matthew's Parish in Pacific Palisades, where Yul Brynner's ashes once rested before being moved to France. Brynner was born in Vladivostok, Russia, in 1920, though he spent much of his life cultivating an air of mystery about his origins, sometimes claiming to have been born in Switzerland or Sakhalin Island. He shaved his head for the role that would define his career, The King of Siam in The King and I on Broadway in 1951, and kept it shaved for the rest of his life, creating one of the most distinctive looks in entertainment history. He won the Tony and the Academy Award for the role. But Brynner was an action star too. He was Chris, the stoic leader of the 7 hired guns in the Magnificent Seven, alongside McQueen, Bronson, and Coburn, 4 members of which we've now visited on this tour. He was Pharaoh Ramesses in the 10 Commandments opposite Charlton Heston. He was the terrifying android gunslinger in Westworld, a role that anticipated our modern anxieties about artificial intelligence by 5 decades. Brynner was a lifelong heavy smoker and died of lung cancer in October of 1985 at the age of 65. Before his death, he recorded a public service announcement that aired after he was gone, in which he looked directly into the camera and said, "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke." It remains one of the most powerful anti-smoking messages ever broadcast. His ashes were ultimately interred at a monastery in France. From the philosophical to the purely physical, let's pay a visit to a man who was built for action in the most literal sense. We're going to Japan once more, where the great Sonny Chiba was cremated after his death in August of 2021 at the age of 82. Chiba, born Sadaho Maeda in 1939 in Fukuoka, was one of the first martial arts film stars to emerge from Japan, and his brand of on-screen fighting was far more violent and visceral than what audiences had seen from the more graceful Hong Kong martial arts films. His breakout role in The Street Fighter in 1974 was so brutal it became the first film to receive an X rating in the United States solely for violence, no sexual content whatsoever. Chiba held a black belt in multiple disciplines and was trained by the legendary Mas Oyama. He appeared in over 150 films and television shows over his career. American audiences rediscovered him in 2003 when Quentin Tarantino, a longtime fan, cast him as the swordsmith Hattori Hanzo in Kill Bill Volume 1. Chiba died of complications from pneumonia related to COVID-19 in August of 2021. Back in the United States, let's take a slight detour from the traditional action genre to visit a man who redefined what an action star could look like on television. We're heading to San Clemente, California, to a cemetery called Pacific View Memorial Park. This is where Jan Michael Vincent was laid to rest. In the late 1970s and early 80s, Vincent was one of the hottest names in Hollywood. He starred in the 1978 film Big Wednesday, a surfing epic directed by John Milius, and in several other action and adventure films. But the role that made him a household name was Stringfellow Hawk in the television series Airwolf, which ran from 1984 to 86. The show featured a high-tech military helicopter and made Vincent one of the highest-paid actors on television at the time, reportedly earning $200,000 per episode. But Vincent's story has a tragic arc. Alcoholism and drug abuse derailed his career in the mid-80s. He was in and out of rehabilitation facilities, was involved in multiple car accidents, and lost a leg in 2012 due to complications from an infection. His final decades were spent in relative obscurity. He died in February of 2019 at the age of 73 from cardiac arrest, and his death wasn't publicly reported until nearly a month later. He's buried here in San Clemente, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Let's head north now, back up to Los Angeles and to Forest Lawn Memorial Park once more. In the main Glendale location, we find the final resting place of Paul Walker, the action star who was taken far too young. Walker, born in Glendale, California in 1973, grew up in a Mormon household and began modeling as a toddler. He appeared in a Pampers commercial before he could walk. He broke into acting with television roles and small film parts in the 90s, including a role in Pleasantville and the teen comedy She's All That, before landing the role that would define his career, Brian O'Connor in The Fast and the Furious in 2001. The franchise became one of the most successful in film history, eventually grossing billions of dollars worldwide. And Walker, handsome, easygoing, and believable behind the wheel, was essential to its appeal. His on-screen chemistry with co-star Vin Diesel grounded the increasingly outlandish series in genuine friendship and warmth. Off-camera, their friendship was real. Diesel named his daughter Pauline after Walker. Off-screen, Walker was an avid outdoorsman, a skilled surfer, and a dedicated philanthropist. He held a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and was a genuine car enthusiast. His passion for automobiles wasn't just an act. He founded Reach Out Worldwide, a disaster relief organization that deployed skilled volunteers to areas hit by natural catastrophes, including the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti and the 2011 tornado in Joplin, Missouri. He was, by all accounts, an extraordinarily kind and generous person, the rare movie star about whom virtually no one had a bad word to say. On November 30th, 2013, Walker attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide in Valencia, California. Afterward, he got into a Porsche Carrera GT driven by his friend and financial advisor, Roger Rodas. The car was traveling at an estimated 90 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone when Rodas lost control. The car struck a concrete lamppost and two trees and burst into flames. Both men were killed instantly. Walker was 40 years old. He left behind a 15-year-old daughter, Meadow, who has since carried on his philanthropic work through the Paul Walker Foundation. The remaining Fast and Furious films honored his memory, using his brothers Caleb and Cody as stand-ins alongside digital effects to complete his final scenes in Furious 7. The tribute at the end of that film, in which Brian O'Connor's white car pulls away down a fork in the road while the song See You Again plays, became one of the most watched videos in YouTube history. It was, for millions of fans, one of the most emotional moments they'd ever experienced at the movies. Let's travel now to the English countryside and then circle back for our final stretch. But first, we should pay our respects to a man who was both an action villain and a leading man. One of the great British actors of the 20th century. Robert Shaw is buried at the Church of Ireland Cemetery in Tourmakeety, County Mayo, in the west of Ireland. Born in 1927 in Westhoughton, England, Shaw was a deeply serious actor, an accomplished novelist who published 5 books, and a playwright. But he also happened to be extraordinarily convincing in action films. He was the assassin Red Grant in From Russia with Love, one of the finest Bond villains ever, delivering a performance so coiled and menacing that Sean Connery's Bond seemed genuinely in danger. He was the obsessive treasure hunter Doyle Lonnegan in The Sting, matching wits with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. He was Henry VIII in A Man for All Seasons, earning an Oscar nomination. And he was, most unforgettably, Quint in Jaws, the grizzled shark hunter whose monologue about the sinking of the USS Indianapolis is one of the most mesmerizing scenes in movie history. That Indianapolis monologue deserves a word of its own. The scene was written partly by John Milius, partly by Howard Sackler, and partly by Shaw himself, who reportedly stayed up all night rewriting it before the shoot. The first take, Shaw was drunk and the scene was unusable. He came back the next day, sober and determined, and delivered it in a single take that left the crew in stunned silence. It's the kind of moment that reminds you why we watch movies. Shaw had a home in Ireland and loved it there. He had 10 children, 4 with his first wife, 3 with his second wife, Mary Ura, and 3 from previous relationships. He was known for his enormous appetites, for work, for drink, for life in general. He died from a heart attack in August of 1978 while driving near his Irish home. He was 51 years old. His health had been declining, exacerbated by heavy drinking. Ireland claimed him, and here he remains, far from Hollywood, in the green quiet of the west of Ireland, where the wind comes off the Atlantic and the hills are as ancient as stories. Back to America now, and to a man whose face was as much a part of the American landscape as the mountains and deserts where his films were set. Robert Mitchum doesn't have a grave you can visit. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea. The Pacific Ocean, off the California coast, the same waters that claimed Steve McQueen's ashes decades earlier. Mitchum, born in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1917, had one of those pre-Hollywood lives that seems fictional. His father was killed in a railroad accident when Robert was 2. He rode the rails as a hobo during the Depression, was arrested for vagrancy on a chain gang in Georgia. He escaped after a few days, worked as a coal miner, a professional boxer, a nightclub bouncer, and a deckhand on a salvage vessel. He drifted through dozens of jobs before stumbling into the movies as an extra in 1943. Within 2 years, he was an Oscar nominee for The Story of G.I. Joe, playing a weary infantry captain so convincingly that real soldiers who'd fought in Italy said it was the most authentic war performance they'd ever seen. What made Mitchum special was his effortless cool. He seemed like he didn't care about anything, about fame, about awards, about what anyone thought, which made him utterly fascinating to watch. He was the definitive film noir star in Out of the Past and Crossfire, playing men trapped in webs of fate and desire with a resignation that felt genuinely dangerous. He was terrifyingly good as the psychopathic preacher Harry Powell in The Night of the Hunter, a performance so ahead of its time that it wasn't fully appreciated until decades later. He starred in war films like The Longest Day, in which he played General Norman Cota leading the charge on D-Day, and action westerns like El Dorado alongside John Wayne. And in Cape Fear, the original from 1962, he played one of the most genuinely unsettling villains in cinema history, the menacing Max Cady, a performance that Martin Scorsese admired so much he cast Mitchum in a cameo in his 1991 remake. Mitchum's career spanned 5 decades and nearly 130 films. He was also a talented songwriter and poet, though he rarely drew attention to these pursuits. He served in the Army during World War II, and in 1948 he was arrested for marijuana possession, serving 60 days on a prison farm, a scandal that would have ended most careers but barely dented his. When a reporter asked him what it was like in jail, he said, "It's like Palm Springs without the riffraff." Mitchum died from lung cancer and emphysema in July of 1997 at the age of 79. 2 days later, his lifelong friend and rival James Stewart died. Hollywood lost 2 giants in a single weekend. Mitchum had once been asked what he wanted on his tombstone. His answer: he sure knew how to waste time. Let's remember one more man who left no grave but left an enormous mark. Patrick Swayze was born in Houston, Texas in 1952 and trained as a dancer and gymnast before turning to acting. His mother, Patsy, was a well-known choreographer in Houston, and young Patrick grew up in dance studios. He was also a gifted athlete, a football player, a swimmer, a gymnast, and he brought that physicality to everything he did on screen. He studied at the Harkness Ballet and Joffrey Ballet Schools in New York, and danced on Broadway before transitioning to film. He became a genuine phenomenon in the late 80s with two films that could not have been more different. Dirty Dancing in '87, in which he played a Catskills dance instructor in a performance that was equal parts grace and raw sex appeal, and Roadhouse in '89, in which he played a philosophical bouncer with a doctoral degree in philosophy who cleans up a rough bar in rural Missouri. If you've never seen Roadhouse, do yourself a favor. It is one of the most purely entertaining action films ever made, and Swayze, lean, tough, and utterly committed to the material, is the reason it works. He did his own fighting in that film, and the choreography is impressive. Swayze followed those up with Ghost, which proved he could carry a romance and earned him a Golden Globe nomination, and Point Break, in which he plays a bank-robbing surfer with almost spiritual charisma opposite Keanu Reeves, and a string of other action and drama roles. He was a genuine tough guy off-screen too, a skilled horseman who could rope and ride as well as any ranch hand, a licensed pilot who owned several planes, and a woodworker who built furniture by hand at his ranch outside Los Angeles. He once piloted his own twin-engine plane through a dangerous decompression event and landed safely. The kind of thing that would have made a good scene in one of his movies. In January of 2008, Swayze was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, one of the deadliest forms of the disease. Rather than retreat from public life, he continued working, starring in the television series The Beast, even as he underwent chemotherapy. He spoke openly about his illness, but refused to be pitied, saying he wanted to be remembered for how he lived, not how he died. He died on September 14, 2009, at the age of 57. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at his New Mexico ranch, Rancho Bizarro, in the high desert he loved, under the kind of enormous western sky that seemed to have been made for him. We're in the final stretch now. Let's visit a few more action legends whose contributions deserve to be remembered. George Peppard is buried at Northwood Cemetery in Philadelphia. Born in Detroit in 1928, Peppard served in the Marine Corps and studied acting at the Actors Studio alongside Paul Newman and Steve McQueen, both of whom we visited earlier today. His first major role was in Breakfast at Tiffany's, alongside Audrey Hepburn in 1961, and he followed it with a string of war and action films including The Blue Max, in which he played a ruthless German fighter pilot in World War I, and How the West Was Won. But for most Americans, Peppard will always be Colonel John Hannibal Smith in the television series The A-Team, which ran from 1983 to '87. His signature line, "I love it when a plan comes together," became one of the most quoted catchphrases in '80s television. Peppard brought a theatrical gravitas to the role that elevated what could have been a silly show into something genuinely entertaining. He was also reportedly difficult to work with on set, clashing with co-star Mr. T and with producers, though the show's popularity never wavered. Peppard was a heavy smoker for most of his life, and he was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1992. He died from pneumonia in May of 1994 at the age of 65, just 3 days before his 66th birthday. Just last month, on February 15th, we lost Robert Duvall at the age of 95. He died peacefully at his farm in Middleburg, Virginia, a 360-acre spread where he'd spent his later years with his wife, Luciana. Duvall was not typically classified as an action star, but consider the roles. Tom Hagen, the ice-cold consigliere in The Godfather. Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, the man who loved the smell of napalm in the morning, arguably the single most quoted line in the history of war cinema. Augustus McCrae in the television epic Lonesome Dove, riding across the Texas frontier with Tommy Lee Jones. Ned Pepper in True Grit, squaring off against John Wayne. He appeared in Bullet alongside Steve McQueen, whom we visited earlier in this tour. Born in San Diego in 1931, the son of a Navy Rear Admiral, Duvall served in the Army during the Korean War before studying drama under Sanford Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse in New York. His classmates included Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman. The three of them shared ratty apartments while working odd jobs, and they remained lifelong friends. Duvall won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Tender Mercies in 1983 and received 7 nominations in total. He wrote, directed, and starred in The Apostle, spending $5 million of his own money to get the film made when no studio would finance it. He worked until he was past 90, doing bicep curls on camera just weeks before his 95th birthday. His wife asked that people remember him by watching a great film, telling a good story around a table with friends, or taking a drive in the countryside. And now, for our final stop, let's go somewhere truly unexpected. We're heading to a small cemetery in the hills above Malibu, California, Sarah Retreat, a Franciscan retreat center with a private burial ground. Here, in a peaceful setting among oak trees with the Pacific Ocean visible in the distance, rests a man who was one of the most popular actors in the world during the late 60s and early 70s, but who has been somewhat forgotten by the mainstream. That's a shame, because Robert Conrad deserves to be remembered. Born Conrad Robert Falk in 1935 in Chicago, he was a compact, intensely physical actor who stood only 5 feet 8 but carried himself like he was 6 feet tall. He was best known for The Wild Wild West, a television series that ran from 1965 to 69 and was unlike anything else on television at the time. The show was essentially James Bond in the Old West. Secret Service agent James West, played by Conrad, fought villains with a combination of martial arts, gunplay, and gadgets that were decades ahead of their time. Think steam-powered robots, hidden sleeve guns, and elaborate traps, all set in the 1870s. Conrad did virtually all of his own stunts, a rarity on television at the time, and his athleticism was remarkable. He was so dedicated to the physical demands of the role that he once broke his collarbone doing a stunt and kept filming. After The Wild Wild West, Conrad starred in the World War II drama Ba Ba Black Sheep, later renamed Black Sheep Squadron, playing real-life Marine flying ace Pappy Boyington. The show ran from 76 to 78 and gave Conrad another chance to play a tough, irreverent military hero. He was also known for his ever-ready battery commercials in the 80s, in which he balanced a battery on his shoulder and dared viewers, with a fixed stare that suggested genuine menace, to knock it off. He had a tough guy persona that wasn't entirely an act. Friends and colleagues said he was intensely competitive and was known to challenge people to arm wrestling matches and even fights well into his 60s. In 2003, Conrad was in a serious car accident that left him with significant injuries, including damage to his vocal cords and limited mobility. He spent his final years largely out of the public eye, living quietly with his family. He died from heart failure in February of 2020 at the age of 84. He rests here in the quiet hills, far from the studios where he made his name, close to the ocean, whose sound carries on the wind through the oak trees. And that, friends, is where our tour comes to an end. We've traveled from Seattle to Scotland, from Vermont to Japan, from the grand cemeteries of Hollywood to small-town churchyards in Ireland and New Mexico and the high desert of Texas. We visited 40 action legends, men and women who made us gasp, cheer, laugh, and hold our breath. We started with Chuck Norris, taken from us just yesterday, and we followed the trail backward through the decades, through the history of action entertainment itself. From the internet meme era to the blockbuster 80s, from the gritty 70s to the golden age of the Hollywood epic, all the way back to Douglas Fairbanks leaping off balconies in the silent era. Some of these people died young. Some lived to extraordinary old ages. Some left grand monuments. Some left nothing at all but the wind and the water. A few of them, McQueen, Connery, Mitchum, Newman, chose to have their ashes scattered, leaving no physical place for us to visit. And yet they're still here, every one of them, because what they created is still here. The car chases and the sword fights, the one-liners and the roundhouse kicks, the motorcycle jumps and the barroom brawls, the moments that made us sit up straight in our chairs and say to whoever was sitting next to us, "Did you see that?" Those moments don't age, they don't fade, they don't get buried. They're out there right now, on screens all over the world, waiting for someone to press play. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.